I came home early on a Tuesday, quiet enough that the front door barely made a sound. I was about to call out to my wife when I heard her voice from the kitchen, low and careful, the way people talk when they think no one else is around. "He doesn't suspect a thing. Don't worry, everything's still on track." I stood completely still in that doorway for almost 2 full minutes, listening to my own wife plan something that, as it turned out, involved both my marriage and my business. And the man on the other end of that call was someone I trusted more than almost anyone else in my life. My name's Owen. 5 years ago, my best friend Tyler and I started a small custom furniture workshop together, the kind of business that began as a weekend hobby in his garage and slowly turned into something real. Steady local clients, a small retail storefront, eventually a handful of employees. Tyler handled sales and client relationships. I handled the actual craft and the books. We split ownership 50-50 on a handshake at first, formalized later with a basic partnership agreement neither of us thought we'd ever need to look at closely. Tyler had been my closest friend since college, long before I ever met my wife, Brianna. He was actually the one who introduced us at a mutual friend's barbecue 6 years ago. He stood up at our wedding as my best man and gave a toast that, looking back now, makes my stomach turn slightly every time I think about the specific words he chose. For the first 4 years of our marriage, things felt steady. Brianna worked part-time doing the shop's social media and basic bookkeeping support, which meant she and Tyler interacted regularly, professionally, in ways that never struck me as anything other than normal. About 6 months before that Tuesday, small things started shifting. Brianna started taking work calls in other rooms. Tyler started suggesting business decisions that, conveniently, would have given him significantly more control over our shared company, restructuring proposals I'd been pushing back on for weeks, citing growth opportunities that always seemed to benefit his side of the ownership split more than mine. I want to be honest about something here. For a long time, I genuinely talked myself out of connecting these details into anything sinister. Tyler and I had disagreements before, plenty of them, over 5 years of running a business together. Business partners argue about growth strategy. That's normal. Spouses occasionally take calls privately. That's normal too. What started shifting that assumption was a conversation with our accountant, a meticulous woman named Diane, who'd handled our books for 3 years. She mentioned, almost in passing, that Tyler had requested detailed personal financial information about me directly. My individual savings, my separate retirement accounts, details that had nothing to do with the business itself and everything to do with my personal financial position as an individual. I asked Diane why Tyler would need that. She said he'd framed it as standard due diligence for an upcoming restructuring proposal, but she'd found the specific scope of personal information unusual enough to mention it to me directly rather than just hand it over without my knowledge. Around the same time, I noticed Brianna had started using a separate, password-protected note app on her phone, something she'd never bothered with before. I didn't go looking through it. I just noticed it existed, the same way you notice a door in your own house that's suddenly locked when it never used to be. A client meeting got canceled that Tuesday, freeing up my early afternoon unexpectedly. I drove home without texting ahead, mostly because there was no reason to. It was my own house, in the middle of a completely ordinary day. I came in through the front door quietly, more out of habit than any specific intention, and that's when I heard Brianna's voice from the kitchen, low and deliberate, clearly mid-conversation with someone on the phone. "He doesn't suspect a thing. Don't worry, everything's still on track. The valuation paperwork should be ready by Friday, and once that's signed, there's nothing he can really do about it." I stood in that doorway, completely frozen, as she kept talking. She used a name a few sentences later that confirmed exactly who was on the other end of that call. Tyler. She continued. Something about how buying him out at the current valuation would be more than fair, all things considered, and how she'd make sure I didn't get suspicious before the paperwork was finalized. I didn't walk in immediately. I stood there long enough to understand that this wasn't a single conversation. This was clearly an ongoing plan, one with momentum behind it already, one that treated my own ignorance as a deadline they were actively managing around. I walked into the kitchen once she hung up. I didn't yell. I asked her calmly who she'd been talking to. She lied immediately, said it was just a vendor call about marketing invoices. I told her, just as calmly, that I'd heard Tyler's name clearly, and that I'd heard enough of the actual conversation to know it wasn't about invoices. What came out over the following hour, in pieces, was this. Tyler had been planning, for several months, to push for a low-ball valuation of my half of the business, using a restructuring proposal designed to look reasonable on paper, but actually engineered to undervalue my contribution significantly. Brianna, it turned out, had been helping him build the case, providing him with details about my personal finances specifically so he could time the buyout for a moment when I'd have the least leverage to negotiate or walk away. And yes, there was more to it than just the business. Brianna admitted, once the first lie collapsed, that she and Tyler had also been involved with each other for almost 4 months, something that had apparently started around the same time this business plan started taking shape. Whether the affair caused the scheme or the scheme created the closeness that led to the affair, I genuinely don't know. And at a certain point, the distinction stopped mattering to me. I didn't react that same week the way either of them probably expected. I met with a business attorney first, before saying another word to Tyler directly, and reviewed our original partnership agreement line by line. It turned out I had more protection than Tyler apparently realized. A buy-sell clause requiring independent third-party valuation, not the internally engineered number he and Brianna had been quietly building toward. I also met with Diane, our accountant, and asked her to formally document the specific personal financial requests Tyler had made, creating a clear paper trail of exactly what he'd been trying to access and why. 2 weeks later, I called a meeting with Tyler under the normal pretense of discussing his restructuring proposal. He walked in with his prepared numbers, clearly expecting the conversation he and Brianna had been planning for months. I let him finish his pitch completely before responding. Before we go further, I said, I want you to know I'm aware of the actual valuation strategy here, and I'm aware of where some of your personal financial information about me actually came from. I watched his expression shift in real time as I continued. I also know about you and Brianna. So let's talk about how this conversation is actually going to go, instead of the version you walked in here expecting. Tyler didn't get the buyout he'd planned. With our attorney's help, I exercised my rights under our original agreement to bring in an independent valuation, which came in significantly higher than his proposed number. High enough that he could no longer afford to force me out at all. Within 2 months, he chose to sell his half of the business back to me instead, at a fair valuation, rather than continue fighting a battle he no longer had the financial leverage to win. Brianna and I separated within weeks of that kitchen conversation. The divorce, once the affair and the business scheme were both clearly documented, moved through relatively quickly. I haven't spoken to Tyler since the day he signed the final buyout paperwork, and honestly, I don't expect that to change. I think about that 2 minutes, standing in my own doorway a lot, not with anger anymore, mostly just with a strange kind of clarity. My wife and my closest friend had been planning, in detail, exactly how to take advantage of my trust in both directions at once, and the only reason it didn't work was that I happened to come home 20 minutes earlier than anyone expected on one ordinary Tuesday. "He doesn't suspect a thing" stopped being true the moment I heard her say it. Everything after that was just me deciding, deliberately, what to actually do with that information instead of letting either of them control the timeline anymore. If this story got to you, the next chapter is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.